Samuel's boots crunched against the brittle earth as he trudged across his barren pasture, the setting sun painting long shadows that made his ranch look lonelier than ever. The wooden fence leaned tiredly, just as he did, and the cattle that once brought him pride now stood like ghosts, ribs showing, heads bowed to the dust. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, but it wasn't the heat that weighed him down. It was the gnawing thought that maybe this land, his father's land, had finally given up on him. He paused at the dry creek bed, crouched low, and let a handful of cracked soil sift through his calloused fingers. For years he had fought against drought, bad seasons, and the kind of luck that seemed to skip past him. Tonight, his muscles ached from another day of toil that earned him nothing, yet even in his exhaustion he whispered into the stillness, "Lord, give me just enough strength for tomorrow." His prayer wasn't for riches, nor glory, but simply for another sunrise where he could try again. The evening air cooled, and a lonely coyote's cry echoed from the hills. Samuel straightened his back, looked over his small, broken ranch, and felt a pang of both sorrow and stubborn pride. He had nothing to boast of but the sweat on his brow and the quiet dignity of never giving up. And though his pockets were empty, there was a spark deep inside, a stubborn ember that told him his story wasn't over yet. Somewhere beyond those hills, beyond his hunger and his hardship, he believed life still held a purpose for him, though he couldn't yet see what it was. With a weary sigh, Samuel turned toward his cabin, unaware that tomorrow would test his heart in ways he never imagined. The next afternoon, as Samuel rode along the canyon ridge searching for a stray calf, a sharp, desperate cry cut through the wind. He froze, reins tightening in his hands, his horse snorting nervously. It wasn't an animal, this was human, raw, and filled with pain. He followed the sound down into the canyon, heart pounding with both fear and curiosity. There, in the shadow of jagged rocks, he saw them, two women of enormous stature, their long black hair tangled with dust. One lay trapped beneath a fallen log, her leg twisted cruelly, while the other knelt beside her, straining to lift the heavy weight, her own arms trembling with exhaustion. Samuel's first instinct was to turn back. These were Apache, proud and powerful, and he knew enough of the tensions between settlers and tribes to understand the risk. But the sight of their struggle cut through every wall of fear. Without a word, he jumped down, throwing his shoulder against the log. His muscles screamed, sweat poured down his brow, but with a final heave the log rolled free. The injured sister cried out in relief while the other caught Samuel's gaze with wide, astonished eyes. He tore strips from his worn shirt, binding the wound as best he could, his hands steady despite the tremor in his chest. For a moment, the canyon was still, three souls breathing hard, strangers bound by a single act of mercy. The towering sisters, who could have easily overpowered him, instead looked at Samuel with a mix of gratitude and wonder, as if unable to believe a poor rancher had risked everything to help them. Samuel simply tipped his hat, whispering, "You'll be all right now," before leading his horse back up the ridge, unaware that his life had just shifted forever. Samuel woke at dawn to the sound of rumbling hooves. His heart jolted as dust rose on the horizon, a cloud that grew larger with every thundering beat of horses. He stepped out of his cabin, squinting against the rising sun, and saw them, dozens of Apache riders descending upon his worn ranch. At their head rode a figure unlike any he had ever seen, tall and commanding, draped in rich buckskin adorned with feathers and beads that shimmered in the light. The chief. Samuel's breath caught in his throat. His first thought was fear. Had he trespassed? Had saving the sisters somehow been a violation of their ways? His horse pawed nervously at the ground as if sensing his dread. The warriors reined in sharply, forming a circle that seemed to close him in, their eyes sharp, unreadable. Samuel's palms grew slick. He had faced drought, hunger, and backbreaking labor, but never had he felt so small, so utterly powerless. The chief dismounted slowly, every movement deliberate, his face grave. The canyon wind stilled, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. Samuel swallowed hard, bracing for judgment, for anger, for a reckoning he feared he could not survive. The chief stepped forward until only a few paces separated them. His eyes, dark and steady, locked on Samuel's. For a long, agonizing moment, no one spoke. Samuel's mind raced with prayers, with regrets, with the memory of the sisters' cries echoing in that canyon. His chest tightened, waiting for the blow he thought must surely come. Then, the chief's lips parted, and instead of fury, Samuel saw something else flicker there, something unexpected, something that would turn his fear into the beginning of a miracle. The silence stretched until Samuel thought he might collapse beneath it. Then the chief lifted his voice, deep and steady, carrying across the circle of riders. "My daughters," he said, gesturing toward the two sisters who now sat proudly on horseback, their injuries bound but their eyes alive with strength, told me of a man who did not turn away. A murmur swept through the warriors, but the chief continued, his gaze fixed on Samuel. "You are poor in cattle, poor in coin, but rich in spirit. You risked your life for ours when you owed us nothing." Samuel's throat tightened. He had no words, no defense. He had acted on instinct, on compassion, nothing more. Yet the chief's expression softened, and with it the weight in Samuel's chest began to ease. "Among my people," the chief declared, "a man who saves family becomes family. From this day, you are not alone." He motioned to the horizon, where fertile land stretched near the river, lush and green in contrast to Samuel's dust-worn ranch. "That land will be yours, and under our protection. You will never hunger again." Samuel staggered back as if struck. The gift was beyond anything he could comprehend, land he had dreamed of but never dared to hope for, and a bond with a people he had only known from a distance. Tears stung his eyes, blurring the faces of the warriors who now regarded him not with suspicion, but with respect. His lips trembled as he whispered, "I don't deserve this." The chief placed a firm hand on his shoulder, his voice carrying both strength and kindness. "Compassion is the highest honor. You have already earned it." In that moment, Samuel's world cracked open, flooded with a light he had not felt in years. Samuel stood frozen, the chief's hand heavy on his shoulder, his heart thundering with disbelief. All around him, the warriors who moments ago had seemed like looming shadows now looked upon him with nods of respect, even quiet smiles. The two giant sisters, their eyes fierce yet warm, lifted their chins in acknowledgement, a silent bond forever sealed. Samuel blinked against the tears that filled his eyes. For so long he had fought alone, scraping by, praying only for the strength to endure one more day. Now, with a single act of compassion, he had been given more than he had ever dared to dream: community, protection, and land that promised life instead of struggle. His hands, rough and scarred, trembled as he pressed them to his chest, feeling the rise and fall of his breath, realizing that hope, real hope, had found its way back into him. As the chief and his riders turned toward the horizon, the rising sun ignited the sky in fiery gold, casting a glow over Samuel's broken fences and tired cattle. Yet to him, it no longer looked broken. It looked like the beginning of something new. He whispered to himself, almost in awe, "A man with nothing can still give everything." And in that giving, he had found the richest gift of all. Samuel watched the riders disappear into the distance, his soul lighter than it had ever been. For the first time in years, he believed tomorrow would not just be another day of survival, but a day of promise. His ranch, his heart, his life, all had been transformed by the simple truth that kindness, even from the poorest of hands, could change the world.